Hello, welcome back to the channel. I'm Duncan and today I want to talk about this, my MPP large format technical camera. This is the camera that's brought me back to large format photography. I'm going to talk about its features, its merits and its limitations and try and give some indication as to whether this is a viable option for the contemporary large format photographer. Bit of history then. MPP, or Micro Precision Products, was a British optical company formed in 1941. In 1948, they released their first product, which was the Micro Technical, and this essentially was a copy of the American-made Speed Graphic. During the 50s and 60s, they went through a number of developments, culminating in the Mark 8 version released in 1963. They also made a number of other cameras, such as their monorail studio camera, and they also made the microcord TLR, which was really a copy of a Rollicord, and they also made a 35mm camera, but they're so rare you're very, very unlikely to come across one of those. Production carried on until 1982, and then by 1989 MPP had gone out of business. My particular camera, I think, is a Mark 6. As far as I can tell. However, that's a little bit misleading because it is actually a military issue camera. In the 50s and 60s, MPP supplied the Ministry of Defence, the MOD, with cameras, and those cameras were bespoke. And so consequently, I'm not convinced that they are the same spec and the same designation as the commercially available cameras. This seems to be closest to a Mark 6 as far as I can tell. You might know different, let me know. I can tell it's a military camera because it's got these military MOD marks stamped all over all the accessories and all over the camera as well. I always assumed that it was a Navy issue camera because I bought it locally and I was living in a naval town. However, more recent research has shown me by looking at this number here that this is actually an RAF issue camera. Now this is all very interesting, but to be honest, it doesn't make any difference. The military cameras are not particularly rare and not particularly sought after, so there's no premium, there's no extra value in them. Possibly the opposite, I don't know. I bought the camera way back in 1987, having just graduated from art school. I missed using the 5.4 cameras that we had at art school, and I couldn't really afford anything posh like a Sinar or a Linhof. And so this camera came my way. It was offered to me privately by somebody who knew I was into photography at a good price, and I snapped it up. It came as a kit. It came with a couple of lenses, lens hoods, filters, wireframe finders, and this box here of dark slides. This is a Bakelite box with 6 MPP dark slides, double dark slides. I used it for a number of years, primarily for landscape photography. I did do some still life and I even tried a bit of portraiture. In the early 90s, I invested in a Mamiya RB67 kit. And I found that I used that increasingly in preference to the MPP, not just for my personal work, but also for my commercial work. The MPP was used less and less and gradually got pushed to the back of the cupboard. And that's pretty much where it remained, other than the odd occasion where I took it out to demonstrate in a photography class the kind of basic principles of a camera. It wasn't until about 15 years ago that I started working with large format film again. And I did that through this zero image pinhole camera, which I've reviewed in another video. The MPP itself just was left to collect dust. But about 3 years ago, I started thinking about it again and started thinking about revisiting large format photography. So I dug the MPP out and it was in a pretty poor condition, I have to say. In fact, it really needed some TLC. So I took the whole camera to bits. I cleaned it and lubed it as best I could. And I also tried to fix the bellows with this liquid electrical tape. which seemed to work quite well. And then I started using it again. And since that point, I've been using it regularly for a number of things, including these urban landscape images, a little project that I've been working on, which is really actually an extension of my pinhole portfolio. So the next thing I'm going to do is put this up on a tripod and then talk you through how the various controls work. But before I do that, if you're enjoying this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. Any likes, comments and subscriptions help me to grow the channel and provide you with more content like this in the future. Thanks. Okay, let's get this up on a tripod and I'll show you how it works. So as you can see, the cameras are kind of a box design made out of what I think is a high-grade aluminium. It has a little clip here which releases the front flap, pulls down to form the baseboard of the camera, and this has the focusing rail. To pull out the front standard, squeeze these two clips together and slide the standard forward. I'm just going to push it back a little bit and it's going to click into place. To fit the lens, I've got this Ray 184mm lens that came with the camera, but I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. To fit the lens then, or the lens panel to the front standard, is pretty much the same as any other large format camera system. Slot the lens panel in and push this sliding plate to hold it in place. Now the lens panels themselves are specific to the MPP, but they are available if you shop around, or you might be able to 3D print one, or you could even make one out of plywood. They are not particularly complicated designs and this works fine. We've got a focusing control here on either side, and it also has a focus lock, which is quite handy, a focusing scale, and we've also got a rangefinder fitted to the side. And this, coupled with the wireframe finders that came with the camera, it means that the camera is perfectly feasible to use as a kind of handheld press camera. I've not actually done that. Perhaps I should, could give it a go. Although I would need to replace the leather handle that's come away here, and I'd also need to sort out the rangefinder because it's out of calibration. Okay, let's put the lens on T and open the lens up and then swing round and have a look at the focusing shade. Now this I find quite useful when I'm in the field. I set my camera up with the focusing shade, I get my rough composition ready, but after that I tend to take it off and work with a dark cloth. This is very easy to remove. Just fold it up, just push it sideways and it will come away. One of the things about the original MPPs is that their screens are not particularly bright. I mean, they're old cameras, and so one of the first things you can do to improve the camera is to replace the screen with a more modern one, and that's something that I've done. I've also added my own custom rules onto the screen, but that's another video. Okay, so there are a number of camera movements available. On the front standard, for example, we have a geared shift and we have geared rise. We have a less sophisticated tilt. Pull this back and it will tilt backwards. And we have some swing. The MPP also has another trick up its sleeve in order to effect some more movements to the front standard. If we unship these locks on the side, push those down, we can drop the whole front baseboard down below horizontal, and that effectively gives us a little bit of tilt forwards, and it's dropped the lens down a little bit. So we've got drop front and tilt front, and we can then adjust with the other controls to find the in-between points. It's a bit crude, but as I say, it does actually work. Turning our attention to the back of the camera, there are some movements here. The back is actually held to the body of the camera on metal rods, and these are released with these locks here, and that means that I can now pull the camera back on these pins, as it were, on these rods, I can create some swing and some rear tilt. Again, not the most sophisticated system, but it does actually work. The back itself rotates to move from landscape to portrait, and it's sprung to accept the dark slides. Now, I've just put in one of the MPP dark slides, and they are actually quite a bit thicker than the more modern types like this Fidelity or Toyo dark slides. But I have to say, I use both types with this camera. I never have a problem with them. It accepts both quite happily. Never had a light leak, absolutely fine. This MPP also has the ability to extend its bellows quite a long way in order to accommodate longer focal length lenses or to focus really close, perhaps for some studio work. In addition to the extension of the rail through the focusing here, the rail itself is telescopic. So what I can do is if I press on this little clip here, I can pull out the rail and extend it to almost twice its original length. In fact, with all the extension that's available on the camera, you can actually achieve about 400 millimeters of extension, which is quite impressive. So while we've got this camera configured for close-up work, there are a couple of key limitations that I think I should point out to you. Firstly, it will only front focus, and that becomes a problem when we get in really close, because front focusing doesn't really work when you're doing close-up photography. Essentially, what will happen is, as you can turn the focus control, the image will get bigger and smaller on the ground glass screen, but it won't necessarily get any sharper. It becomes very, very difficult to focus unless you either move the subject or physically move the camera, and this is really irritating. The second issue is that the tripod bush is mounted at the back of the camera here, underneath the main body, and not on the underside of the baseboard. Some technical cameras do have a tripod bush here as well, but this one doesn't. And that means that everything is shifting forward. The weight's forward, the camera becomes quite unstable, and it has a tendency to walk down over time, or it can do. So it doesn't really work very well as a close-up or as a studio still life camera. If you're a still life photographer, if that's your thing, I'm going to suggest that this type of camera is definitely not for you. Instead, you should get a monorail. And in fact, I did exactly that. I bought this Toyo 5.4 monorail camera precisely because I wanted to do some still life work, and this thing was driving me crazy. This camera also came with a wide angle lens. This is a Ray 89mm. And to mount that, I need to set the camera up in a slightly different way. So first of all, I'm going to take this standard lens off, and I'm going to fit the 89mm to the front standard. In you go. And then what I need to do is make sure everything is zeroed up and then slide the front standard back inside the camera body. Finally, I will drop this front panel down a little bit in order to make sure that this edge isn't encroaching into the image area. Now, one of the problems here is this is on a kind of a top hat board, and everything is pushed back inside the camera. It's very compressed, it's very tight in there. And that means that any kind of camera movements with the front standard, when we're using the wide angle, are virtually impossible. And so the only movements you can affect are really with the rear standard. A brief word about the lenses. This camera, being a military issue camera, came with Ray optics. And I was a little bit apprehensive about this, thinking that, are these going to be any good? Are they going to be up to it? The commercial versions of the MPP more often than not come with Schneider, and obviously that's a well-respected brand. So I did some experiments with them. I made some 2016 prints, and I can say that this Ray 184 is actually a very, very good performer. I'm finding it sharp, plenty sharp at 2016. At all apertures, certainly wide open, no problem, and it opens up to f4.5, which is a bonus. It's also got quite a large image circle, so that I found that I could use quite extreme movements with this and still have no issues with fall off. In fact, I've been using this on my monorail as well for some studio work and for some still life work with quite extreme movements, and it performs exceptionally well. This wide angle, on the other hand, not so good. I've noticed at the same size, 2016, it's definitely not as sharp as the Ray. It just doesn't have that biting edge. And I've also noticed that even when I've stopped it down, I'm getting softness in the very extreme corners. It also doesn't have a particularly big image circle, and so if you did any extreme movements with it, obviously I can't with this camera, but if I did any extreme movements with it, I'm pretty sure it would fall off pretty quick. So this one really I would like to replace, preferably with something like a Super Angulon. Some versions of the MPP came with, I think it's a Schneider 135, and the way in which that's mounted in the camera, it's possible to leave the lens on the lens board in the camera and close the camera up. And that's dead handy because that means you can just open the camera up wherever and start shooting. This lens though, and this arrangement, you can't do that. It's not enough clearance. So I have to take the lens off in order to close the camera up. So I'm just going to do that now, whip that out, and then to close the camera up, I just push down on these two levers and close the camera up. Now that's ready to take off and put straight into the bag. So should you buy an MPP Micro Technical camera? Well, I think the questions are more about the style of camera than it is about this particular model. What I can tell you is, even though my one is pretty worn out, has been abused over many years, it's had a life. I mean, it was pretty worn out when I got it back in the 1980s. The quality of the engineering of the MPP is not in doubt. If you were to find yourself a good used example, maybe a Mark 7 or a Mark 8, you would have a very, very good camera. Yes, it's not as glamorous as a Linhof or as slick as a Toyo 45A, for example, but it is going to give you very, very similar results. The lens is going to be more important than the camera, of course. So I think the MPP Micro Technical is an excellent choice for the first time 5.4 photographer. Okay, thanks for watching. That's it for this one. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and more content will be coming your way soon.